Today's shir begins at the top of Daf Mem Tes at the Mishnah. Before we begin the Mishnah, we glance at the side where we have a nosei, a topic heading, where we have written Deos Shonos Ba Mishnah. There are different opinions, different Tanaic authorities that appear in the Mishnah. Ma Gorein Lemamzerus. What type of relationship, of forbidden man-woman relationship, would result in the birth of an illegitimate child, a mamzer? Bear in mind that a mamzer is Jewish, however, he is unfit to marry another Jew, another regular, standard Jew of pure heritage. He is allowed to marry another mamzeres like himself. And there are other possibilities that exist. However, to marry into the rank and file of the Jewish people, that is forbidden. The Mishnah, Ezu Mamzer, Kol She'er Basar Shu Beloi Yavoi, Divrei Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva represents a very strict opinion whereby he will include many types of forbidden relations that would produce mamzerus. So let's take a look at Rashi at the top. Kol she'er basar shu b'lo yavo, kol kurva, any relative, shehi belav, that is forbidden to you in a negative form, negative command, ve'afilu ein bo kores, even if it does not contain or it does not result in a kores punishment, kores penalty, kagon, anusas oviv, Rabbi Yehuda, the Havya Balav, the lo yegale knaf oviv. A person's father, let us say, he rapes a woman. According to the Tana Rabbi Yehuda, that woman is prohibited to the son in the form of a negative command based on the pasuk of lo yegale knaf oviv. This is a pasuk found in Dvarim Perek Chav Gimel pasuk Aleph. We will see this pasuk cited later in the Gemara. Umachmas kurva di aviv, the isur, the prohibition, is through his father, because the father raped the woman. That creates a prohibition, an isur. Ukigo no se chalutzaso, dave below yibone, or a man who had released his sister-in-law through chalitza, for him to then have relations with her would be a negative command known as lo yiboneh. V'havei lav de kurva below kores. It's another example of a negative command that is through a relative. They are considered related. There are other forms of negative command that are not relative related. But let us take, for example, a kohen cannot marry a grusha. That's a negative command, but it's not a function. A grusha is a divorcee, and that's not a function of someone who is related. There's more to say on this topic, as we'll see in the Gemara. But in the meantime, Rabbi Akiva will say that any man-woman relationship that carries with it a negative prohibition, a lo saseh, even if it doesn't have with it a kores punishment. Kores, for example, is characteristic of brother-sister type relations. When I say type relations, you can have situations of mother's brother, father's brother. Those are brother-sister type relations. Those are forbidden, but carry with them a kores penalty. We continue in the Mishnah. Shimon Atimni oimer kol shechayovim alav kores bidei shamayim v'halacha kidvorav. Shimon Atimni is more lenient in the sense that he limits mamzerus to those kind of relations that would carry with them the kores punishment. Kores is a term we don't translate. We just use that as a term. Hopefully people understand what that is. It means to be cut off, whether it means to die young or die leaving no children, or children dying in one's lifetime. These are different possibilities of what kores might be. But it has to be, in order to create mamzerus, it would have to be a prohibition that carries with it the kores punishment. And the Mishnah builds into itself, and that the halacha follows Shimon HaTimni. For Rebbe Yoshua Omer, Kol Shechayev Melov Misas Bezdin. He is even more limiting as to what creates mamzerus. Only those kind of forbidden relations that would be punishable by court execution. Those are featured in Maseches Sanhedrin, all of the different forbidden or illicit intimacies that are punishable by death. Son having relations with his mother, father with daughter, and other examples. Mother-in-law, for example, is another one of those. Mother-in-law, son-in-law, father-in-law, daughter-in-law, those are punishable by court execution. Omar Rabbi Shimon ben Azai, Motzosi Megillas Yuchsim B'Yerushalayim. Rabbi Shimon ben Azai says, I found a scroll that deals with genealogy, deals with pedigree, the Kosuv Ba, and it said in the following. It said in it the following: Ish Ploni Mamzer Me'eshes Ish. So and so, and apparently the name was spelled out in this particular scroll, and it proclaims that so and so is a mamzer because his mother was married to a man, and she had intimacy with another man, producing this fellow as their son. Now, Eishes Ish, we want to emphasize, is an example of Chayve Misos Bezdin. That means a married woman having relations with another man, so that that forbidden relationship carries with it a court execution punishment. And the Megillas Yuchsin, by spelling it out in this fashion, that he is a mamzer because of the Eishes Ish, the married woman relationship, that's Lekayim Divrei Rabbi Yeshua. That would support Rabbi Yeshua's approach. Namely, that mamzerus results only from those illicit relations that are punishable by court execution. The Mishnah goes on to present two scenarios where the sister of the spoken about woman will be muter, will be muteres. And that will be self-explanatory as we go on. Ishto Mesa, and the next section you'll see is Yevimto Mesa. So Ishto Mesa, a person's wife dies, muter bachosa. He is allowed to marry the wife's sister. The Gemara will point out that this section of the Mishnah is truly unnecessary because you can see it in the psukim of the Torah itself, which we call Zil Kri Beirav. Go read it in the psukim. Nevertheless, we have it here in the Mishnah. Gersha Umesa Muter Bachos. A person divorces his wife and then she dies. You can marry her sister. This is in contrast with a person that divorces his wife and she remains alive. You cannot marry her sister. Nisesli Acher Umesa, or your wife was after she was divorced, she married someone else and then died. Muter Bachosa, you can marry her sister. Yevimto Shemesa Muter Bachosa. A person, let's say you have Ruvain and Shimon are brothers. Ruvain died, leaving a widow, and now that widow is, and if assuming that Ruvain left no children, so that widow is bound to Shimon. So that's his Yevama. While she's alive, you cannot marry her sister. That the sister of this widow is called Achois Zikukasa, the sister of the one connected to you. However, if the widow dies, Muter Bachosa, you can marry her sister. Cholatzlo Mesa. Once you do chalitza with the Yevama, and then she dies, Muter Bachosa. Again, this is in contrast with the case of if you simply did chalitza with the widow, and she has a sister, and the widow, your brother's widow, is still alive, the sister is forbidden on the grounds of being achos chalutzaso, the sister of the one with whom you did chalitza. But if after chalitza she dies, then muter bachos, you can marry her sister. Nises liacher mumesa. If the chalutza was released, in other words, the widow was released, she married someone else and then died, Muter Bachosa, you can marry her sister. And now the Gemara goes into sources for the different opinions we saw in the Mishnah. On the side of the Gemara under our nosei, our topic heading, we have an outline of what we will see in the Gemara. So Aleph are Mekoros L'Deos Shebesoich Rabbi Akiva. Just skip a moment down. Beis, you see, is Mekoros Shimon HaTimni, and Gimel is Mekoros Rabbi Yeshua. Those are the three Tanaic opinions we saw in the Mishnah. However, within Rabbi Akiva, there are a variety of opinions. Rabbi Akiva, once again, was fairly expansive in how mamzerus could come about. We can call him a very strict opinion in that sense, that he creates mamzerus from we'll say, low-level types of forbidden intimacies. We said in the Mishnah that Rabbi Akiva will provide or account for mamzerus even from an intimacy that is a mere negative command without a kores penalty. So in our note we say on the side, Mekoros L'Deos Shebesoich Rabbi Akiva, the different opinions within Rabbi Akiva, the Yesh Mamzerus Mechayve number 1, Lavin the She'er, negative commands that are based on relatives. In other words, relatives that are Osir Be'isur Lav. There's another opinion within the Rabbi Akiva framework that says Chayve Lavin Afilu She'enom She'er, negative commands where a man-woman relationship is prohibited even if they are not related. There's no family element between them, but nevertheless they cannot cohabit by virtue of a negative command. Even that can produce mamzerus. And number 3, which is a rather extreme approach, even from forbidden relations where the type of prohibition, or the level of prohibition is called an isur aseh, where the Torah is commanding a person to marry a certain type of individual, and we'll see more about that, how it comes out to be an isur aseh. We'll see in the Rashi later on. The example cited is a person, a man who marries an Egyptian convert. The Torah says that when an Egyptian converts to Judaism, one has to wait till a 3rd generation of that Egyptian convert before they can marry rank and file, standard miyuchas Jewish people with a pure Jewish background. So only a 3rd generation, and that is a positive command. It says Dor Shlishi Yavo, that 3rd generation shall come into the camp, so to speak, into the Jewish fold. So that's stated in a positive vein. Dor Shlishi Yavo, 3rd generation shall enter. Now, what about the 2nd generation? So the 2nd generation is called a lav habal michlal. Say it's a negative command that is derived from the positive. So since it's, even though it sounds like it's negative, we say 3rd generation yes, 2nd generation no, but that no is derived from the positive, and the rule is that a lav habal michlal say a negative command that's derived from a positive, where the scripture spells out the halacha, the ruling, in a positive fashion, and we infer from it the negative, that carries with it the status of a positive command. You might say, well, what difference does it make? How you classify it? Is it a positive or a negative? Well, there's a major difference. If one violates a pure, straight-out negative, non-inferred, but rather explicit negative command, he could be subject to lashing. One who violates a positive command, then there is no lashing punishment accompanying it. So within Rabbi Akiva, we see we'll call 3 levels or 3 possibilities of how mamzerus could come about, but they represent 3 different schools of thought. One is negative commands that are based on family relations. Another is explicit negative commands in general. And the 3rd approach is even those forbidden relations that are classified as positive commands. The next thing we'll see in the Gemara is the Mekoros Shel Shimon HaTimni, who says that mamzerus comes mifiyuve kores. And the third opinion, we'll have to see the source for him. It's Mekorish Rabbi Yeshua, rak mifiyuv misas bezdin. The Gemara. My time of Rabbi Kiva. What is the basis of Rabbi Kiva who says that mamzerus could result from mere negative command relations, intimacies that are forbidden by virtue of a loisaseh? The Gemara answers, and take note of the fact that we're calling this a long answer. We're going to include within this answer all the different opinions as to what Rabbi Akiva represents. So the first is, Dichtiv, the pasuk says, Lo yikach ish es eishes aviv, velo yigale knaf aviv. That is the pasuk, and in focusing on that second expression of velo yigale knaf aviv, the interpretation is knaf shira aviv lo yigale. Now, knaf literally is the corner of a garment, but it is a reference to a woman that the father had been with, the woman that the father had been with, lo yigale, you, the son, cannot expose. That means you cannot have intimacy with her. Now, who is being referred to in this phrase, the knaf aviv? In the first part of the pasuk, it says, one shall not take the wife of one's father. Well, that's very clear. But what is this, the knaf aviv? So the Sovar law, Rabbi Yehuda, the Mishnah in presenting Rabbi Akiva holds like Rabbi Yehuda's interpretation of that pasuk, the Yomar be'anusas aviv hakosuf medaber, that this pasuk is referring to a woman that one's father raped. He did not marry her; he simply raped her. Dahavyalah chayve lavin. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, anusas aviv is referred to in this pasuk, and that she is prohibited to the son. There are other opinions on the woman who was raped by one's father. This we saw at the beginning of the Masechta. But according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, she is prohibited to the son to the tune of a loisaseh. V'somichlei, and in the vicinity of that pasuk, it says, you'll notice we started with a quote from pasuk Aleph, and we go now to pasuk Gimel. So v'somichlei, it says, near that pasuk, lo yavo mamzer b'kal Hashem, the prohibition of a mamzer marrying into the Jewish people. Alma, we see from this, Mei Hani Have Mamzer, from this type of prohibition, from a negative command, Mamzerus could result. Now we saw before in Rashi that the woman that was raped is prohibited to this particular son because the father raped her. So it's an isur, it's a kurva, it's considered a prohibition of kurva, of relatives. However, there's another version, Ulo Rabbi Simoi, the marbe she'ar chayve lavin belav de she'er. Be careful with the reading. That's why in Gemara markings we put in, on rare occasion, we put in the actual vowelization, because here you can have an actual opposite meaning of terms, and if you don't have the vowelization, you'll end up messing things up. Where he's marbe she'ar means other chayve lavin that are not the she'er. She'er means relatives, non-relative prohibitions. What would be an example of that, of non-relative prohibitions? So if we look in the Rashi, we see, he says, under the Dibor Masul, Rabbi Simoy, to keep things simple, we're not going to start with the beginning of that Rashi, but if you skim down a little bit into that Dibor Masul, you can see a squiggle underlined Kegoin. Kegoin, Maksir Gushoso Mishanises. A person who, let us say, divorced a woman, and she married someone else, and then he took her back. That is a negative command. Ukegoin Nesino Yisrael Dekaima Beloisis Chatein Bom. There's a negative command not to marry the women of the 7 nations. A man shall not marry a woman from those nations, the 7 nations that occupied the area of Eretz Yisrael before the Jews conquered it. Or another example is an Ammonite man that marries a Bas Yisrael. There's a negative command, Lo Yavo Ammoni, Lo Yavo Ammoni Moavi B'Kal Hashem. A man from the Ammonite people is forbidden to marry a Jewish woman. That union would create mamzerus. So those are examples of lavin that are not based on kurva, based on someone related, family relationship. Continuing in the Gemara, Ula Rebbe Yeshevov, the marbe afilu chayve asay. According to, so far we have Rabbi Simoy, who is marbe other kinds of lavin, and Rabbi Yeshevov, who understands Rabbi Akiva to be marbe afilu chayve asay. And we cited an example before of a chayve asay is a Jewish woman marrying an Egyptian convert, or vice versa, before the third generation of conversion. That's a chiyuv asay. Nafka lahu. So according to Rabbi Simoy and Rabbi Yeshevov, who expand the understanding of Rabbi Akiva to include even these kind of prohibitions, they learn out the Torah source for that from the Vav, mi v'lo. The pasuk said v'lo yegale knaf oviv. You might notice in the original pasuk we have a little arrow to the side, and you can skim up and try to see the arrow above where that Vav appeared. The Vav adds these kind of forbidden relations. So that within Rabbi Akiva, all kinds of forbidden relations, even if they don't carry with them severe punishments like kores or misas beisdin, nevertheless, the resultant offspring will be a mamzer. The Shimon HaTimni savar law karabonon. The Amri, Shimon HaTimni, says that mamzerus comes through kores. Shimon HaTimni holds like the Rabbanon. Now, the Rabbanon referred to here, this is in contrast to Rabbi Yehuda that we saw cited before in the, let's say, the fourth line of the Gemara itself, where we saw the Savarlok Rabbi Yehuda. This is in contrast to that, where Shimon HaTimni holds like the Rabbanon in interpreting that the pasuk of V'lo Yegale Knaf Oviv, the Amri b'Shemeres Yavam Shel Oviv HaKosov Medaber. The V'lo Yegale Knaf Oviv is not talking about the woman raped by one's father, but rather it's a reference to the one's father's brother's widow. We call the Yevamos. Now, a father's brother's widow is basically the nephew looking at his uncle's wife. A nephew looking at his uncle's wife, if it's father's brother's wife, she is prohibited to the nephew to the tune of a kores punishment. So a son who has intimacy with the shomeres yavam of one's father, tahavyulo chayve krisus. That's an example of a chiyuv kores. She happens to be, as we said, one's father's brother's wife. V'samechle, and near that in the Torah, as we saw before, it says lo yavo mamzer, the prohibition of marrying a mamzer. Amo mechayve krisus have a mamzer. That mamzerus comes about through relations like that are punishable by kores. So before we go on, let us just go over what we've said. For some, this discussion might appear complicated. There is a pasuk that we saw at the opening of the Gemara, Dvorim Perichav Gimel Pasuk Aleph. It had read Lo Yikach Ish Es Eshes Aviv, V'Lo Yigale Knaf Aviv, and following that it spoke about the prohibition of mamzerus. We know there's a machloikis between the names that we see marked in the geometric form, Rabbi Yehuda versus the Rabbanon. How do we understand V'Lo Yigale Knaf Aviv? According to Rabbi Yehuda, V'Lo Yigale Knaf Aviv is a woman raped by one's father. That is, according to Rabbi Yehuda, punishable by it's simple, or should say it's a simple negative command. According to the Rabbanon, that pasuk V'Lo Yigale Knaf Aviv, the Rabbanon who argue with Rabbi Yehuda take that to mean a shemeres yavam of one's father or one's uncle's wife. So if you approach the pasuk like Rabbi Yehuda did, you would then come out with the Rabbi Kiva result, where even a negative command would produce mamzerus. If you approach the pasuk like the Rabbanan do, so lo yigale knaf oviv represents a kores punishment, a kores relationship, and that's the Shimon Hatimni approach to things. What we find in this kind of Gemaras, you find in many Gemaras throughout the Shas, is that there's a combination of opinions where, in this example, Rabbi Kiva would be learning the pasuk like Rabbi Yehuda learns it, versus Shimon Hatimni, who learns the pasuk of Lo Yigal Knaf Oviv like the Rabbanon learn the pasuk. Now the third opinion, Rabbi Yoshua. What is the basis of his opinion? What was Rabbi Yeshua's opinion? That a forbidden relationship to the tune of court execution, chiyuv meisas bezdin, only we'll call it the most severe type of prohibited relationship could result in mamzerus. Rabbi Yeshua, he explains, lichtoiv rachmana lo yigaleh, lo yikach loma li. Now let us look at Rashi together. Rashi, toward the end of the narrow lines. Hachi garsinon v'Rabbi Yeshua lichtoiv rachmana lo yigaleh klomar I v'shemeres yavam shel aviv mishtoi oy ganusas aviv mishtoi. If the pasuk was talking about what the other opinions claimed it was talking about, either shomeres yavam of his father, the father's brother's widow, or a woman raped by one's father, lichtoiv lo yigale knaf aviv luchudei. Let the Torah write just that. And that would tell us that mamzerus could result from chiyuv krisus if you take the Rabbanan approach to the pasuk, or from a negative command if you take Rabbi Yehuda's approach to the pasuk. The kol shekei me'eshes av dahavya b'korei sumisa, and all the more so mamzerus would result if a son has relations with one's father's wife, which is punishable by court execution. And when we say court execution, every case of court execution has within it the potential for kores. That's, of course, if you have no witnesses or no warning was given beforehand. So Rabbi Yeshua says, if the pasuk is to be understood like the other opinions, so let's go back to the Gemara text, 4 lines from the bottom, lichtoiv rachmana lo yigaleh, and then I would be able to conclude certainly misas beis type of forbidden relations would result in mamzerus. Lo yikach loma li. Why does the Torah write lo yikach ish es eshes aviv? Why? That would seem to be overkill. Pardon the pun on that. But why does the Torah write that if they are correct? Elo lav hachikama. Rather, they're not correct as far as Rabbi Yeshua is concerned. Rather, the Torah is saying thusly: Mi lo yikach ad lo yigale have mamzer, which means only something like Ashes Aviv, father's wife, that is written between the words lo yikach up till, not including the words lo yigaleh. So up till lo yigaleh, that will cause mamzerus. Fei lo ave mamzer. But more than that, meaning to include more than misas beisin, to include more prohibitions that are less severe than misas beisin, that we do not do. You'll ask then, okay, why then does the Torah bother writing lo yigale knaf oviv? What's it doing in this pasuk? So Rashi raises that question 5-6 lines from the bottom of the Rashi commentary, and he says there, "V'kashio knaf oviv lamai kasvei." What's knaf oviv doing here? I b'shomeres yavam. If it's in fact referring to the shomeres yavam, lav or lov b'shnei lavim. It's telling me that a son that has relations with his father's sister-in-law who's waiting for Yibum, he'll be in violation of two negative commands. Father's brother, sister, plus this new lav of lo yigale knaf aviv. And Rashi spells them out. Erva sachi aviv lo yigale v'lav de lo yigale knaf aviv. Ve'i b'anusas aviv ashmina d'asura. And if it's referring to anusas aviv, so the Torah has to tell us that once a man rapes a woman, the son of that man is forbidden to her. He's not punishable by court execution, or not even by correlate, but he is forbidden. So there is a purpose in writing lo yigale knaf aviv in this pasuk according to Rabbi Yeshua. However, it is not there to tell me that mamzerus results from that low or lower level offense. Let's read that. Then let's read Rabbi Yeshua again. 3 lines from the bottom of the Gemara. What is the pasuk telling me? Milo yikach ad lo yigale have mamzer. From lo yikach until the words lo yigale would create mamzer. So what's written there in the Torah? Eishes aviv, which is punishable by court execution. Tfei lo have mamzer, but more than that would not include mamzerus. Would not result in mamzerus. Omar Abaye, Akol Moidim. Everyone will agree. Even Shimon HaTimni will agree. Shimon HaTimni was one that said that a chiyuv kores relationship, a prohibited man-woman relationship that would result in kores, produces mamzerus. There are exceptions, though. So everyone will agree. The boal al hanida, a man has relations with a menstruant woman. Even one's wife, when she's experiencing the monthly female cycle, she's prohibited to her husband. And if husband and wife cohabit when she is a nida, the couple is punishable by kores. Very, very severe offense. If one does engage in a nida relationship, even though it carries with it a kores penalty, everyone agrees that it will not result in mamzerus. Another point of agreement: V'al hasoita she'ein havlad mamzer. So when we say everyone agrees, Rashi points out with regard to the kores, with regard to the boal hanida, even Shimon HaTimni, who said that kores would result in mamzerus, he will agree that in this case, the boal hanida, which is kores punishable, will not result in kores. And the al hasoita, everyone will agree, even Rabbi Akiva will agree, that one who has relations with a sota, she'ein havlad mamzer. What is a sota? A man is married to a woman who had been warned not to be alone with another man. And lo and behold, she goes and is alone with another man. The Torah says that the husband is usher to his wife until they go through the Beis Hamikdash procedure, checking her out with the drinking of the water. So if we look in Rashi at the top, Abal Asoita Eishes Isha Zinsa, the Kaimel and Asur L'Baila, and Rashi goes a little further than the way I explained it. An Eishes Isha Zinsa is a married woman that had forbidden relations with someone else, that had, because she's married, she's forbidden to some other man. What is her status with regard to her husband, to her own husband? So from the Torah standpoint, she's forbidden. She's asur l'bayla perakama. Mani mekayim asher hu tamo l'rabos soito shenistra yafagav d'chayvei lavani. Even though it's a chiyuv lav, even though it carries with it a penalty or it's considered a negative command, it's not punishable by kores, but it is a negative command for the husband to be with her. Moide Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Kiva will concede that Rabbi Kiva the polygad Rabbona b'masnisen, though that Rabbi Kiva that argues with the Rabbona in the Mishnah, the Machzigu Shalso, the Kamar Davlad Mamzer, Rabbi Kiva holds that a man who divorced a woman and she married someone else and he takes her back, the offspring is a Mamzer. Afagav the Lav Chayvei Lavin the Sherhu Hocha Moidi the Ein Vlad Mamzer. That even though Machzigu Shalso is a negative command that's not a function of a relative, of a family relative, Here he will concede that the vlad is not a mamzer. So we continue in the Gemara. The Gemara now gives sources for these two exceptions. The point that Abaye mentioned, that everyone will agree in the case of a Boal Anida that the vlad is not a mamzer, and in the case of Boal Soita, a man has relations with his wife that had been mizaneh, the vlad is not a mamzer, even though both, of course, are forbidden relations. The Gemara continues, Nida, Deha, Tafsi, Ba, Kedushin. Shenemar. The term Tafsi, Ba, Kedushin means that a man who, let's say, marries a Nida, a marital bond is formed. This is in contrast with other chiyuvei kores. For example, a brother who attempts to marry his sister, the sister is not married to the brother. The practical difference between saying if a marital bond is formed or not can be illustrated easily by asking the question, is a divorce document necessary in order to sever the relationship? So if a brother attempts to marry a sister, he gives her money in matrimony, they split. There's no bond that's formed. However, if a man marries a nida, a woman who is experiencing her monthly cycle, who hasn't been mitayr herself yet, she is a nida, he cannot cohabit with her, and if he would, it would be just like brother-sister, a kore's penalty. Nevertheless, if he marries her, if he offers her money and she agrees to marry him, from that point on, if they want to split up, a get will be necessary. So we say that by nida, tafsi ba kedushin, by virtue of the fact that a marital bond can be formed with a nida, that creates an equation, if you will, that since a marital bond could be formed, mamzerus will not result. Shenemar vatihi nidasa alav. Afilu b'shas nidasa. The word vatihi was what the Meforshim call lashon havaya, the verb form of to be, but in this case it means to be married. So you can see in this verse, nidasa, vatihi, nidasa, that even though she's a nida, she nevertheless vatihi, she becomes married. Let's read that line again in the Gemara. Shenemar vati nidasa, afilu b'shas nidasa, tafsi ba kedushin. Even when she's a nida, kedushin does take hold. Marital bond is formed. Soita, nami, tafsi, ba, kedushin. With regard to the sota, the marital bond nevertheless exists. Tanya, nami, hachi. We have a Tanaic source that supports this. Hakol moidim, beba al hanida. That's number one. We saw that already. The al hasoita, that's number two, which we also saw. And here's a surprise. The al shomeres yavam, she'ein havlad mamzer. We have a Tanaic source that adds a third example. This is a woman whose husband died leaving no children. There was a surviving brother, but she didn't wait for yibum nor chalitza. She went ahead and married someone else. It's a Yevamos shenasa l'shuk. For that man, the outsider, to marry the widow is a violation of a negative command. Lo tia eshes hamesa chutza li'ish zar. That's what the pasuk says. However, that union will not result in mamzerus, according to this Tanaic source. We just on a backtrack for a moment. We said the sota, there is no mamzerus when the man's wife had intimacy with some other man. The husband, though, is forbidden to continue living with his wife. If he does cohabit and impregnate her, the resultant child will not be a mamzer. And Rashi explains, that even after she had relations with that other man, that doesn't obliterate her original marital status with her husband. So, as we said before, there's an equation that appears in this Gemara, though I must say you have to look into Meforshim on the topic. There's much more to say regarding this point, but from our vantage point in this Gemara, if there is tfisas kedushin, if a marital bond can be formed or exists, then the resultant offspring child from that intimacy will not produce mamzerus. Now we saw in this Tanaic source a third example, something that Abaye had not mentioned. So the Gemara turns its attention to Abaye. Why didn't he mention this third example of Abaye? Shomeres Yavam Misafkale. He is in doubt. Ikerav, Ikeshmuel. There's a machlokes, or a difference of approach. Rav holds that a Shomeres Yavam that marries someone else, she marries what we call is a lashuk, without chalitza, there is no tfisas kedushin. That's Rav's opinion. Well, according to Rav then, since there's no tfisas kedushin and there is a lav, Rabbi Akiva would say there is mamzerus. However, Abaye is not sure if Rav's approach is the one to take. Shmuel is simply not sure about that. According to Shmuel, if someone marries a shomeres yavam, some outsider marries her before she received chalitza, it could be that there is tfisas kedushin, and Shmuel would require a divorce document to separate them. According to Rav's approach, where there's no tfisas kedushin, they just split. There would be no need for a get. However, that would produce mamzerus. Abaye, as we said, is in doubt how to go Rav's route with the shomeres yavam or Shmuel's approach. Therefore, he didn't want to commit himself by saying hakol moidim. Everyone would agree regarding the shomeres yavam lashuk and the non-mamzerus status of such a child. Omer Shimon ben Azai b'chulei Toni Shimon ben Azai Omer. This is a brisa that parallels the Mishnah, expands a little bit, and he says Matzatzi Megillas Yuchsiv Yerushalayim v'Kosova. I found this scroll in Jerusalem, and there was written in it several points. One is v'Kosova Ish Ploni Mamzer Me'eshes Ish. That we saw already in the Mishnah. That so-and-so, specifying his name. Here the Gemara doesn't tell us his name, but so-and-so is a mamzer because his mother was married to a particular man, had relations with another man, and that other man is this fellow's father. So this his father had relations with a married woman married to someone else, producing him, he is a mamzer. Because of all, another point that was mentioned in this scroll that Ben Azai found, Mishnahs Rabbi Lezer ben Yankov Kav Venoki. The teachings of Rabbi Lezer ben Yankov, though few, Kav is a measure, but it's a small measure. So it's a way of saying that the teachings of Rabbi Lezer ben Yankov are few in the Shas. However, Venoki, they're very clean, meaning when he says something, he sifted out any debris, any unnecessary information, and comes to very clear conclusions. And as a result of that, when his name appears, we will end up taking his opinion very seriously. Rashi says, wherever he is mentioned, the halacha will follow him. And a third point that he found in this Megillas Tainis, in this Megillas Yuchasin, in this scroll of genealogy, is Menashe Horag es Yeshaya. King Menashe was the son of Chizkiyahu HaMelech, that he killed the prophet Yeshaya. On the side of the Gemara we have a nosei topic heading, and we indicate Ad Daf Nun Omid Aleph, Menashe Don es Yeshaya Lamus. The King Menashe, he ruled that the prophet Isaiah is to be executed. On the grounds that the prophet said three things, he authored three verses that contradict the Torah. That contradict the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu. So based on that, King Menashe felt that the prophet Yeshaya should die. So we're going to be occupied with this issue until Daf Nun Amud Aleph, as we said, close to the end of the Perek. Omar Rava, Meidan Dainei V'Katle. That means Menashe, Meidan judged him, Yeshaya, and executed him. Omar Lei. Take note of the structure of the Gemara. There's a long question. The point of this long question is to present what was bothering Menashe. Menashe, the king, raised questions on that which Yeshaya had written. And toward the end of the long question, you'll notice there's a bracketed section. And at the end of this, so as part of this story, Menashe condemns Yeshaya on the grounds of three contradictory verses, contradictory to the Torah. Yeshaya does not respond. The Gemara will explain why Yeshaya remains quiet. We can say ahead of time, before we even read the Gemara, Yeshaya knew that Menashe, who, by the way, was not known as a pious individual, he was known as a Rasha, even though later in life he did tshuva, but he was known, as far as Yeshaya was concerned, as someone that would not accept his response. He wouldn't accept Yeshaya's defense. And therefore, Yeshaya said, I might as well, knowing that he's not going to accept my arguments, if he kills me thinking that he's right, without hearing any defense, so at least he'll be what's called shogeg. He's considered, we'll say, less deliberate, considered, his act of killing me will be an act of shogeg, as opposed to if I tell him that he's making a mistake and he still kills me, then he, Menashe, will be mazid, deliberate. Therefore, he said, I'm not going to change matters. I'm not going to improve this situation by responding to him. So he chose to remain silent. The Gemara, though, says, after all is said and done, the points that Menashe raises in our long question are points that need to be addressed. After the long question, you see a long answer marking. It's at that point that the Gemara will then resolve the psukim, resolve the seeming contradiction, offer an explanation for why Yeshaya wrote what he did in his prophecy. The Gemara, Omar Lei, the king Menashe says to Yeshaya, Moshe Rabba Chomar, Moshe your master, Moshe Rabbeinu lived many generations before, but he was the father of all prophets, so to speak. It's a figure of speech. Or the master of all prophets. He said, Ki lo yirani ha'odam v'chai. In the Torah, Moshe Rabbeinu records that the Almighty says, man cannot see me and continue living. V'ad amris, and you write, Vo'ereh es Hashem yoshev al kisei rom v'nisa, and I see Hashem sitting on the lofty great throne. So you're contradicting. Moshe Rabbeinu says, Lo yirani adam. And here you're saying, Vo'ereh, and I saw. Moshe Rabbeinu Chomar, number 2, Mi Hashem Elokeinu b'chol kareinu elav. Who is like our wonderful God that can be summoned at all times. He's always open for prayer and supplication. V'yad amris, and you say, Dirshu Hashem behi motzo. Seek out the Almighty only when He is found. In other words, only at times. He's not always available. So you're contradicting Moshe Rabbeinu regarding the availability of the Almighty to receive prayers. Number 3, Moshe Rabba Chomar es mispar yomecha amalei. In the Torah it says, I will fill your days, meaning I will enable you to live your complete, we'll say, assigned life. In other words, the person has a certain length of life that the Almighty determines, and if a person merits it, he will live out his full life till that which was predetermined or pre-assigned. I will fill it up to the top, but not overflowing. The Amris, but you say v'hosafti al yomecha chomesh esrei shana, and you describe a situation of a person having 15 added years, meaning there's a full life and then an added over the top. That would contradict what Moshe Rabbeinu says. After the brackets, the Gemara says, Mikol mokom kashu kroi adodi. After we say what we do in the bracketed section, the psukim still remain difficult. And the Gemara will explain them afterwards. Within the brackets, as we said before, Yeshaya remains silent, and the Gemara explains what his thinking was. Omar Yeshaya. Upon hearing Menashe's objections, Yeshaya says to himself, Yodano be belo metabu ma the amole. I know that he will not accept that which I say to him. The amole yishvai mezid. And if I do say something, ishvayo mezid, I will make him into a deliberate murderer. Therefore, it's better for me to remain silent, and if he kills me, the Menashe, will not be held as severe an offender as if I do tell him. Omar Shem Ivla Barza. The prophet pronounced the ineffable name of the Almighty, and miraculously he was absorbed into an Erez tree. In other words, the prophet says, I'm going to try to run and save myself rather than stand here and try to refute his objections. So he tries to escape. And he does so with this, let's say, this miraculous fashion. And the ineffable name, my understanding of things is that enables the prophet to assume supernatural powers, connecting with the Almighty. The Almighty, of course, is above nature, and something supernatural took place, and he was absorbed into a tree. Asua la'arza ben Asrua. They were aware of what happened. The king and his men were aware. They brought that tree and they started to saw it, knowing that the prophet was inside the tree. They were sawing and sawing, and according to Rashi, it seems that they sawed right through the prophet's mouth. What a terrible way to go. It's a sad, traumatic type of death. Now, the Gemara is grappling with this. Why was that his way of death? Mishum the Omar, because the prophet Yeshaya to say that he was a great man would be an understatement. To be a prophet of his proportions, we can't even imagine how great the individual was. However, he slipped up on something from which we derive a very important lesson. He said regarding the Jewish people, he was disgruntled, and he said, I dwell amongst a profane-mouthed people. Rashi adds, when the prophet said that, he wasn't saying so in the context of chastising. He was simply speaking ill, if you like the term, bad-mouthing the Jewish people. That is something that one must be very careful to avoid. If one has something to say and it's in the context of constructive criticism and you can do something about it, so then say what you need to say in order to improve a situation. But to simply sit back in an armchair and badmouth individuals, and certainly the entire Jewish people or sections of the Jewish people, this is something that one must avoid. And look how severe that sin is. A man of such piety, such greatness, like Yeshaya, but this was the reason for his suffering this type of death. We continue in the Gemara, after the bracketed section where we see Yeshaya is remaining silent and what eventually his fate was. But nevertheless, the psukim remain difficult. We numbered off 3 different objections that Menashe raised against the psukim found in the prophet Yeshaya. The Gemara answers, Vo'er Hashem. How could the prophet say, and I beheld Hashem, when Moshe Rabbeinu says you cannot behold Hashem? Kidesanya kol hanavim nistaklu baspaklaria sheina meira. All the prophets, other than Moshe Rabbeinu, had their prophecy through visions that were eino meira, that were not 100% crystal clear. So people who have visions, but things are not crystal clear, they can end up coming to incorrect conclusions. They can think they see when they don't actually see. Moshe Rabbeinu's prophecy was different. He saw things with extreme clarity, and therefore, because of his clarity, he knew that he could not perceive the Almighty. We're in the context of a Daf Yomi shir, so we're going to be moving on, but we can't move on without simply saying that these ideas are extremely deep ideas. Yes to see, not to see, to Kodesh Baruch Hu is not something that one could possibly perceive in the first place. So, nevertheless, these are topics that need much broader discussion. Nevertheless, on a very superficial level, the prophet, because of his inability to see with 100% clarity, thought that he was able to perceive the presence of the Almighty, and Moshe Rabbeinu, with his extreme clarity, Aspaklarya Hameira, realized that you cannot perceive the Almighty. Dirshu Hashem b'motzo. We saw that the prophet said, seek out the Almighty when He is available, and yet Moshe Rabbeinu says, B'chol kareinu elav, He's always available. There's no contradiction. Ha b'yochid, ha b'tzibur. When you're dealing with an individual, a person who prays in private, it's questionable whether his prayers will be heard. They'll be heard b'himotzo. That's b'himotzo, when he is available. When it comes to the tzibur, tefillah b'tzibur, prayers that are done in the context of a group, a minyan of 10 people, then those prayers are always heard by the Almighty. The Yochid Emas, we say that the private individual's prayers will be heard only when he is available. When is that availability time? Omar Rav Nachman, Omar Rabba Bar Avua, Elu Asora Yomim Shebein Rosh Hashanah Liyom Kippurim. Those are the 10 days that we refer to as Aseres Yimei Tshuva, the days that extend from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur. Number 3, Es Mispar Yomecha Malei, the issue of a person's life, his lifespan or his determined length of life. Is there a possibility of years being added to it? The Gemara says regarding this Tanoihi, the issue is a machlokes Tanoim. This Sanya, we have a Tanaic source beginning here and continuing till the upper few lines of Nun Amud Aleph. Es Mispar Yomecha Amalei. That's the pasuk we saw quoted from the Torah. Elu Shnei Dora. Shnei means the years that are assigned to a person. Elu Shnei Doros. Zocha, if a person is of merit, Mashlimin Lo. He gets the full amount that was originally allotted to him. Lo Zocha, if he does not merit, he's too many sins, we'll say, then Pochasin Lo, Divrei Rabbi Akiva. Then his years are subtracted from his original allotted amount. So you see, according to Rabbi Akiva, there's no possibility of a person receiving more than the allotted number of years. V'chachamim omer, Zocha moisifin loy. Loy Zocha poichasin lo. According to the Chachamim, you can see that a person who, because of his merits, can actually have years added. And v'amalei, the word v'amalei doesn't mean just filled up, but it means added to. If he doesn't merit, this of course could result in his losing years from the allotted number. Omru lo l'Rabbi Akiva, harei hu omer, the Rabbanon who do entertain this idea of adding to the allotted number, they say, well, the pasuk seems to bear out what we say. The pasuk from Yeshaya, V'osafti al yomecha chomesh esrei shana. I will add to your life. This was a pasuk in the context of Chizkiyahu HaMelech, that he merited having 15 years added to his life. Omar Lohem, the Rabbi Akiva says in response, those 15 years weren't added to his allotted number, but rather Misheloi Hoisifu Lo. Those were years that he was to live anyway. However, as a result of events in his life, he had merited to have those 15 years as part of his life to live out the full allotment. We look at Rashi on this topic, on the second line from Dam Mishelo Sifalo, Elo shemitchila hayurotzim livchois mishanav. There was a thought to reduce his years, his allotted years. That thought that had come up as a possibility regarding the king Chizkiyahu. But as events unfolded, those years were not subtracted, and rather the 15 years that they had thought to subtract were granted to him to fill up the original allotted number of years. Teda. Rabbi Kiva goes on to say, and you should know, and as I can bear out my opinion, Sharei, and now here we're going to go through a line or two of Gemara, and then we'll look at Rashi to explain it. Sharei Novi Oimeid Umisnabe. The prophet arose in the time of Yeravam. Yeravam is a time period much earlier than Chizkiyahu HaMelech. Chizkiyahu HaMelech was the great-grandfather of a king known by the name of Yoshiyahu. So there was a Navi that arose in the time of Yeravam and said, Hinei ben nolav lebeis David Yoshiyahu shmo. So there was a prophet prophesying that generations later, a descendant from the house of David will be born by the name of Yoshiyahu. And when this prophecy was said, V'adayin loy noilad Menashe. Menashe was the grandfather of Yoshiyahu. So when this prophecy was said, even his grandfather wasn't born. Now Menashe, let's emphasize, was the son of Chizkiyahu. That is by way of background. Now we look at Rashi. Shrei Novi Nisnabe B'mei Yeravam Shonim Harbe Koidem. A prophet arose in the years of Yeravam, many years before the birth of Yoshiyahu, and he said, Hinei ben nolav lebeis David Yoshiyahu shmo. A child will be born from the house of David by Yoshiyahu by name. Ubishas chol yoy shel Chizkiyahu adayin loy noilad Menashe. And when Chizkiyahu was deathly ill, Menashe had not yet been born. Shemi menu yotze Yoshiyahu. From Menashe, Yoshiyahu eventually was born. As we said, it was his grandson. Heve Omer, from here we therefore see Bishas Cholyoy Gozru Livchois Mishonav. When he was ill, he was deathly ill, and we said Menashe wasn't born yet. He was going to die before Menashe, the grandfather of Yoshiyahu, was born. What does that show you? That shows that there was a gezerah to reduce his original allotted number of years. He had a greater number of allotted years than he was at the time he was deathly ill. We see there was prophecy that he was going to produce Yoshiyahu, who would come through Menashe. So he was going to have to live beyond his deathly ill state. So what happened? So it must be that when he was deathly ill, there was this thought from heaven that he should die now. And when he merited the miracle of being healed, they returned those missing years during which Menashe would be born, and giving rise eventually to Yoshiyahu. So Rabbi Kiva says, from this incident, we see that there is an original allotted number of years. If a person doesn't merit it, that original allotted number could be reduced, and if he then merits, the original allotted number of years could be returned to the individual. But nothing about going beyond the original allotted number. So now we continue in the Gemara, V'Rabbanan. What do the Rabbanan say about this? Seems to be a pretty solid proof that when we speak about seems to be simply turning the original allotted number. The Rabbanan say, Miksiv Michizkiyahu. Where does it say anywhere that Yoshiyahu was to come through Chizkiyahu? Lebeis David Ksiv. The prophecy said that King Yoshiyahu would come from the house of David. The descendants of David were not limited just to Chizkiyahu. If he would be born from Chizkiyahu, fine, he could come through Chizkiyahu. But if Chizkiyahu would die, never bearing Menashe, so as far as the prophecy is concerned, Yoshio could come through some other descendant from Beis David, from the house of David. So the attempt of Rabbi Akiva to say you see the concept of Zocha Mashlimin Lo from the prophecy of Hinei Ben Nolad LeBeis David Yoshio Shmo, you don't see that in a conclusive fashion. The Mishnah had mentioned Ishto Shemesa, a person's wife that dies, you can marry her sister. Yevimto Shemesa, if one's Yevama, one's sister-in-law, dies before you do Yibum with her, so you can marry her sister. Omar of Yosef, Kan Shona Rebbe Mishnah She'ena Tzricha. Here, Rebbe teaches a Mishnah that you don't really need. Why don't you really need it? Because this very information you can see in a pasuk in the Torah. Vayikra Perek Yudches, pasuk Yudches. Rashi quotes the pasuk Oleo B'Chayel. One's wife's sister is forbidden only when one's wife is still alive. But if she's not alive, you're allowed to marry her sister. Therefore, the Mishnah didn't have to tell me that information. Nevertheless, it did, so be it. As you can see, with that, we have finished the fourth parak of Yevamos.